Welcome to the Pretty Powerful Podcast, where powerful women are interviewed every week to share real inspiring stories and incredible insight to help women or anyone break the barriers, be a part of innovation, shatter the glass ceiling, and dominate to the top of their sport, industry, or life's mission. Join us as we celebrate exceptional women and step into our power. And now, here's your host, Angela Gennari.
Thank you for joining us today. My name is Angela Gennari, and this is the Pretty Powerful Podcast. And I am sitting here with Miss Allison Bittel. And I am super excited because she is bringing a wealth of knowledge, and I'm very happy about what we're going to be discussing today. So welcome, Allison.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Allison so that everybody is aware of who we're speaking with today. So Allison Bittel is an Atlanta native and has been in the commercial real estate industry for 21 years. She is a senior vice president and principal with Colliers Atlanta. Throughout her career, she has developed a passion for mentoring and supporting other career women. In 2020, she founded the Women's Collective, a 501c3 C6, bringing together C-suite and executive level women leaders for an exclusive experience. In just 2 short years and during a pandemic, Allison has grown the organization to 130 members and raised sponsorship money for 2022 programming, supporting the pillars of workplace, education, and mentorship. She has been married to her husband, Phil, for 21 years, and they have 2 teenage sons. Welcome, Allison.
Thanks again for having me. It's great to be here.
Tell me, you are in commercial real estate, which is a very male-dominated industry. Am I correct?
You're very correct.
And how did you get your start there, and what prompted you to want to go into that industry in particular?
So I'm actually, as you mentioned, I'm an Atlanta native, and my dad was in commercial real estate development, and his older brother was in general contracting. So when I graduated from college, I said, I'm going to get as far away from real estate as I can. I grew up in it. And ultimately, I wound up back in Atlanta in 2001 and started my career in real estate. And I will tell you, it's an amazing industry. And I really was pleased to be able to, after working in some other industries, to get into this industry. It's been a 21-year amazing journey. So.
Wow. Oh, well, that's wonderful. I appreciate that. So I can imagine that going into commercial real estate, and dealing with a lot of, builders and, male commercial real estate agents, that you must have had quite a bit of competition out there. Did anyone step up to mentor you in this time? Did you find that you had a lot of guidance, or were you really kind of off on your own to figure it out?
So I'll kind of answer that in 2 ways. I was fortunate to join a team when I started at my first company in 2001. So I did have some good mentorship internally. But what I found challenging is that there were not very many women in my business. And so as I became a young mom and began to sort of manage the daily ins and outs of juggling the 3-ring circus, I used to call it.
Right.
It became really hard because there weren't women that I could call on. And so I feel like what we did is there were several women that were peers of mine, and we all worked together and built sort of a peer mentorship.
Okay.
Because many of us stayed in the business. What tended to happen is women that were older than me in commercial real estate had either chosen not to have families or not to get married, or they may have only had one child because the demands are so great.
Right.
And so my generation of women, we were the first generation that came back to work with one or multiple children. And so I was able to really develop my sort of group of peer mentors. So I had both, but no formal program.
Right. I understand. And you've done some pretty big deals. I was looking at your resume and some of the things that you've done. And I found this on the Colliers site. They are very proud of you. You've done some pretty significant deals in Atlanta. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Tell me about that process of finding these big deals and, getting them to trust you to really be able to handle the whole thing start to finish.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it took a long time to sort of build the skill set. And I spent a lot of time really perfecting early in my career the transaction side of the business, really becoming intimately knowledgeable on how to negotiate leases and to be what I call a trusted advisor. And the other thing that I think's helped me be successful in commercial real estate is the trust factor.
Yeah.
Really taking the time to get to know my clients and building those relationships. And with that trust comes long-term relationships, which I've been fortunate to have many of those.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you touched on negotiation. So this is one of my favorite things to do in the whole world. I love a good negotiation. So tell me, which strategies would you give to people about how to be a good negotiator?
So, it's funny, when I first came into the business having so few women, I was worried about getting a reputation, right, of being a woman. I won't say the word that many people probably know I'm thinking right now. But also not backing down and being shrewd in what I believe in. And so I think when I give people advice on negotiation, there's always a middle ground. And I think you go in with absolutely everything you want, but that there's some giveaways. So I think there's always got to be some things that you're willing to give on and know what's important. And I think that is what's important with your clients, is really helping guide them on items. We might get into a lease negotiation and have maybe 10 outstanding items that we've got to deal with. And what I'll say is, let's talk about the ones that are most important to you. And let me advise you on, you might think this item's important, but actually when you negotiate leases, you're negotiating a lot of hypothetical. Well, if this happens, we need this protection.
Right.
So really kind of helping walk them through the importance of where to fight and where to sort of give.
Right.
So that's probably my best advice.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah, I love to negotiate, and I say the same thing. You can both come out a winner in a negotiation.
Right.
Some things are going to matter more to other people. You can't have everything.
Right.
Choose your battle.
Exactly.
And so one of my sayings that I say all the time is, "This is not the hill you want to die on." Right.
Right.
Is it that important to you that this is the hill you want to die on? And if it's not, let it go. Let that be part of the negotiation, because maybe that is important to somebody else.
That's right.
So yes, I fully agree with you that, it's important to take into consideration what is important on both sides and find that middle ground. That's because, everybody thinks negotiation comes down to price and terms, and that's not always the case, right? Sometimes it could be the amount of time it takes to close, and the amount of, the terms of the lease in terms of how long it is, and, the upgrades, and, any little concessions that could be meaningful to somebody that may not cost you a lot in terms of time or money. So awesome.
One of my partners that I worked with for many years, who's a mentor of mine, said to me very early on, always be thinking about how your deal is going to get in the ditch. So as you're negotiating, even if things are going really well, always be thinking about what could go wrong, and be working through those possibilities so you're prepared. So
Absolutely. All right. So then you've spent a great successful career in commercial real estate, and then you decided to take a little pivot and go into starting something called the Women's Collective. So tell me about your motivation behind that and what prompted you to do that at that time.
Sure. So about 10 years ago, I'm a board member at the Atlanta Commercial Board of Realtors, and we're actually the largest commercial board in the country.
Oh, wow.
And one of my former partners, he was a managing partner at my previous firm, was very passionate around the diversity and inclusion in our industry. And so there was a big diversity initiative about 10 years ago. We were a little before our time with kind of what's happened in the last couple of years. So we started this diversity committee and really put a lot of energy in creating a diversity mentorship program.
Okay.
And so we were really, we built this program out, and I've worked on it for over 10 years. And it was around women and people of color who, the real estate business is very, very familial, and everyone knows everyone. And so if you don't grow up in real estate, you might not really even understand how to get into the business. And so we felt like there was this lack of diversity because people didn't have exposure to our business. So we built this diversity mentorship program, and I spent 10 years developing it. Every year we would have greater than 50 candidates for 12 spots.
Wow.
So spent a lot of time building curriculum around that. And I really got passionate around this is where I can have an impact. This is where I can give back to the community. So in 2020, when I joined my new firm, they were super supportive around helping me do it for women in general. I really said, I've done a lot in my own industry, but now I want to take it bigger. I want to take it to the city of Atlanta, and I want to connect with other senior women, and I want to bring them together, and I want to figure out how we collectively, i.e. the Women's Collective, can influence change for women coming behind us.
That's awesome. And, before the podcast started, we were talking about how, for a long time, when women had reached a certain status, their first inclination was not necessarily to pull up the women behind them because they had worked so hard to get there. They knew that their time in an executive level position, they had worked really hard to get there, and they felt like they needed to protect their spot, right? And so I feel like there was a bit of territorial nature, I guess, to that because there were so few women in the executive level. And now we're starting to see a major shift. And that has been a huge blessing for women to be able to say, look, this is not a competition. We all can be successful. So tell me how Women's Collective really kind of fosters that environment.
Sure. So you're exactly right. I think for years it was, sort of clawing to the top, right?
Right.
Now
right.
It doesn't have to be that way anymore, which is so great. So we really have 3 pillars that we're focused on at the Women's Collective.
Okay.
Mentorship is pillar number 1. And we have just launched a program called Leaders on the Rise. And we have a mentorship program through the Women's Collective. We have 15 women who are between 6 and 12 years out of school. So we really wanted to get women that were in that first sort of decade of business, that were starting their families and were starting to hit that place in life where maybe they need to pull back or maybe they need to just get out of the workforce. So that we feel like that's really a good time to get to the women that might need mentorship.
Right.
The second thing we're doing is a lot around education. So we do programs during the year. We just had a panel in February for the exodus of women from the workplace. And we had 4 amazing panel members and over 50 women came to our breakfast. And we talked about some of the trends and things that we're seeing and what are organizations. We had folks from Coca-Cola and the Weather Channel and other large firms talk a little bit about what they're doing company-wide and how are they supporting women. And then the third thing is just the workplace. Really just how do we as women learn to use our voice and to step up? A lot of times we're quote unquote the onlys. We might be the only woman in the C-suite. I know you talked a little bit about being the only in meetings.
Right.
And sometimes it's intimidating.
Right.
So we've got to find the strength and the courage to stand up and ask the hard questions and advocate for women in our organizations.
Absolutely. So you mentioned the exodus of women from the workplace. Let's talk about that a little bit because that's really fascinating to me because, I know that, at a certain stage of life, a lot of women will choose to leave the workplace temporarily or permanently, and, to raise children, to be at home, to find another avenue. Why do you think that is? What is causing this exodus in the workplace?
So I think there's a couple of things. One thing that we talked about with this panel was the fact that women, and I mentioned it a few minutes ago, this first 10 years out of school and how women really do lose their confidence. And I think that's when they start exiting the workplace. I think they get to a point where they say, and a lot of companies won't offer you a throttle back option. They won't say you can go part-time. And this is one of the things we talked about at the panel was it's important for companies to offer people, maybe you want to go part-time for a few years. Right. And it's not just for women. It needs to be for the men too, right? It needs men are probably afraid to ask for something part-time. Right. But I think in today's times, men and women are both, in a lot of cases, dual working families. So what if your wife is trying to get her master's degree? Or what if your wife has got a big job that she's been promoted into? Maybe you need to throttle back as a man to support your wife in her role, and you need to do the carpool for a while, or so it's becoming okay now. And I think that's where we can support women is companies need to allow the part-time or the reduced work hours for both men and women.
And
because I think,
time.
because I think that's a big part of why women are leaving is you get to a point where you say, what's my priority? Right. And you've got to take care of your family. That's always going to be your priority. And so how do you do both? And the workplace sometimes is what is the give.
Well, and sometimes, if a woman chooses not to have children, maybe she's trying to get an advanced degree and, she doesn't have the luxury of just, like when I got out of college, I really wanted to go to law school, but I couldn't afford it. But once I started working, I wanted to go back to law school, but it was so hard to find that time. Like I couldn't not work full time, but I also couldn't find the energy, the space, the time to be able to work full time and go to law school. And so I never ended up going to law school, but it's one of my regrets that I never did. But it's those cases, where if I had an employer who said, look, let's do flex time, because again, back then, flex time wasn't really as common as it is now. Since the pandemic, flex time has become probably first and foremost what people are looking for in their job. But, at that time, you were expected to be in the office 9 to 5, plus, 9 to 5 plus, whether that meant you're working till 7 that day, or events or networking events or functions or whatever it is. And so, having flexibility, I think would encourage women to stay in the workplace more. Because you're right. I mean, when you have small children at home and you're having to do, whether it's carpool or, tutoring or helping with homework or activities, it's overwhelming. So whether you are the mother or the father, it does have a huge impact, and, your time becomes condensed. And so having flexibility, I think, would help tremendously with that. I tell my employees and, in management, I need 40 hours of work from you. If you can get 40 hours of work done in 20 hours, so be it. I just need 40 hours of work.
That's
because
right.
To me, the production is more important than the time. I don't want to be a timekeeper, but I need a certain output. So if you're highly efficient with your time, fantastic. But, that's kind of how I look at salaried employees. So,
well, one of the things we talked about was if you lose women in that first 10 years, if you don't give them that flexibility and you don't figure out a way to mentor and sponsor and keep them in the workforce, you lose them forever.
Right.
Because if a woman's out of the workforce for 10 years, it's very hard to re-enter when your kids are older. And I mean, I have 2 teenagers and I'm as busy as I've ever been.
Right.
And I've got one that drives, but it's still it's the reality of life. Right. And so
Absolutely.
I think that's why the mentorship and everything is so important in that first 10 years, is to make sure that we're giving them the support they need, helping with the confidence building, helping them aspire, and allowing them the opportunity to grow and still be able to do one of the women was talking about somebody on her team's training for an Ironman.
Wow.
A man on her team and has chosen to do more part-time work right now because he's training for it. So it's, again, we have to take away this image of that the reduced work schedule is a mommy track or a woman track. It's an everyone track.
It really
we all
is.
can do it.
And it's important for life balance. Let's be honest, because, we don't want to get to that point where we start enjoying our lives once we're retired, right? Like we want to live our lives now while I have the energy and the time.
Exactly.
You just need the time to be able to fit it in. And so, when you devote too much time to work, you can definitely have an imbalance, and then it affects every other part of your life, whether it's stress, family, travel, enjoy life now while we have it to live. So, okay. So great. So tell me a little bit more about what inspires you.
What inspires me? Wow. That's a great question. I think that I'm inspired by the ability to have an influence, the ability to help other women. I think if I had had something like the Women's Collective, leadership, our Leaders on the Rise program when I was in my 20s and early 30s, it would have been great. And I think what we have to remember is that everybody's been through some type of challenge. So you're not alone. I think sometimes you can feel very alone when you're juggling a lot. And so I think that's probably something super important to remember.
Yeah, I say that challenges are the commonality.
Right.
Not everybody has a chance to be incredibly successful in their lives, but we've all overcome challenges.
Sure.
So speaking of that, tell me some challenges that you've had in growing your business, and whether it's, the Women's Collective or commercial real estate or whatever, led you to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think some of the things, being in a very male-dominated business early on, I wasn't taken seriously. I would make calls and people on the other end of the line would ask, well, what broker are you calling on behalf of? I'm the broker. I was in my mid-20s and female, and there just weren't a lot of us. And so, I think that was probably one big obstacle. I think not having formal mentorship programs was definitely an obstacle for me. And then I think the third thing that I really struggled with was being a working mom. I chose my husband traveled when my kids were little, and it was a lot. I mean, I was driving an hour and a half one way to and from work to get them to daycare and downtown to the office, and then the reverse in the afternoons, and fighting traffic. And it was a choice I was making, but at that point in life, it felt like moment to moment, right? Like you couldn't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
So definitely, challenges on those fronts for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me, I know that as women, we tend to give our power away. And, we say, oh, it's because my spouse did this, my family did this, these doors were open because of this. And while all of that is very true, and we don't get to where we are alone, tell me a time that you've given your power away, and then another time that you've stepped into your power, and what was the difference in the time?
So that's a really great question because it sort of folds into sort of my journey over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
So I spent 18 years at my last employer, and because the years that I was there, I was raising my children. I said it was okay to take a more of a transaction role. I was a little more behind the scenes, allowing the men to be more forefront with the clients. And I just was, I was good at the transaction. Again, I think this gets back to the confidence issue of like, I was confident in the transaction side. I knew I could manage that.
Right.
So I didn't force myself to step outside of transactions. And so I think I allowed the power to be given away because I made the choice to put myself in that position. And I think what was interesting is at the end of 2019, I sort of came to a place in my career where I said, I need to be the one on the front lines. I need to be the one out there more. And it took me through about a 6-month journey where I wound up actually changing companies. And there was a lot that went into it, but I basically decided that I needed to get uncomfortable to grow myself. And that was really a part of it. So I felt like I took the power back when I made that change. I was in a very comfortable role. I had a great team. I had everything that like people aspire to get to.
Absolutely.
But something was missing. And it was that power piece. And so it was a big, bold move to change after 18 years, but it has created an opportunity for me to really grow. And I have really, I feel like I've really taken the power back by making that change.
Absolutely.
So,
and I love that you talk about the confidence, right? The up and down of confidence. How can, somebody who's young coming into their career, how do they maintain that confidence level? And is it possible to maintain that confidence when you're going through the trials of your career? Like, how do you maintain that level of, I deserve to be here. My voice deserves to be heard. I want to step into my power. And how do you do that younger? Because I know that, in later in life, it's easier.
Sure.
But how do you do that as a young woman?
Well, I think that's the key. The key to that is to have a good mentor.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, and I think people need to understand the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, right? Like you need a mentor. You need and you may need, I had one friend say, you need a board of directors. You need 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or women mentors and a man or 2 in there as well. But that you can go to and say, here's what I'm struggling with. Because now that we're older and we have the advice we can give, that's what we should be doing. And then I think you also need a sponsor in your organization. I think we talked a lot about the importance of asking to attend meetings. Maybe you don't say anything in the meeting, but asking to attend that meeting. And then people say, oh, I know Angela. She was in that meeting. She's very sharp. You start to get noticed more, but you need a sponsor, somebody senior that brings you to those meetings. And you might sit at the end of the table and not say 2 words, but people take notice of you. So I think it's twofold, the mentorship and the sponsorship.
Oh, I agree. I agree. I love that. Yeah, I agree that having somebody who steps up with us, kind of brings us into those opportunities is equally as important as somebody who guides us along the way.
Right.
I've been fortunate to have great mentors in my life, but there are times when the opportunities were not presenting themselves. I had to open those doors myself. I had to create the opportunity, and that takes a level of kind of confidence, gut check moments where you're like, okay, here I go. I'm going to create this opportunity, and I might fall on my face and I might look silly, but if I don't, it's never going to happen. Right. And so that confidence, I think as a young woman, comes from creating enough of those opportunities for yourself and stepping into those roles where, and I don't know if you've ever felt this or not, where you get imposter syndrome, where you're in the room and you're like, do I belong here? Have you ever experienced something like that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think especially if you're in a room full of way more senior people than you are, you definitely feel that way.
Yeah.
And you have to, again, to your point, confidence comes with experience.
Yes.
So that's, again, why I think women our age are so able to help the younger women, because we can say to them, don't feel that way. Mm-hmm. I've been there. I know what it feels like. And you don't need to feel that way. You deserve to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people need to get over the idea that failing at something is fatal, right? So there's that quote says, failure is not fatal and success is not final, right? So if you understand that success is short-lived, you don't know how long you're going to be at the top of your game. But in the meantime, if you also fail, that's okay too. Enjoy the moment when you have it. If you do fail, learn from it, get up and start all over again.
I think failure makes us stronger.
It does.
And so I think people are certainly afraid of failure. But when I left my last company and started at Colliers, it was scary. And I was in my mid 40s and I'm making this big job change and it's been the most wonderful experience, but I had to force myself you have to lean into the fear.
Yes.
And absolutely. I think that if you live your life worried about failing, you won't grow.
And you'll never step up. You'll never attempt anything, right? Because if all you can think about is, what if I fail? You're never going to take that first step. You're never going to get, into that state of mind where you say, regardless of what happens, I'm all in. And it's hard to succeed if you don't take that step, right?
Well, and one of the things they say about women, and I've talked about this on other, in other forums, is that women won't apply for a role. Even if it's in a company they're already in, they won't apply for another role if they don't have 80% of the skills.
Wow.
Men will apply with 30 or 40%.
Wow.
So there's this whole idea of
right.
You don't have to check every box. Just because you don't have all of those skills doesn't mean you can't do the job.
Absolutely.
And if you surround yourself with the right people, you're going to learn. And that's how you're going to grow.
Right.
If you never apply for anything else, you're never going to move.
Right.
So it's that whole idea of, yes, you may not have all those skills, but why not try it? If it doesn't work out, then it wasn't meant to be. But at least you know that you went and tried it.
Absolutely. And the biggest mistake I've made as a business owner is hiring someone for their skill set, because the ones that I've hired for their skill set have turned out to be a disaster typically. And the ones that I've hired because I just saw something in their character that I knew that they would do well, those are the ones who have been the biggest success. Hire for character, not skill set sometimes. And there's obviously not everything, medical, healthcare.
Sure,
you want them to have a certain level of skills. But in a lot of cases for management, for me, management comes down to, is it a good culture fit? Does this person have the drive and the tenacity that I'm looking for in somebody who's going to be, have some grit and do the job? Or is this somebody who is going to rest on their laurels that they are overqualified for a position? The worst thing you can do is hire somebody overqualified who then thinks of your job as almost, too easy and it doesn't require anything of them. You want somebody to have a little bit less qualifications than you're looking for and fight hard to get there, because that grit and that tenacity really makes all the difference in their leadership qualities.
And I think that's the key to a good leader, right?
Yeah.
A good leader recognizes that person doesn't have all the skills. You said exactly what I was thinking and what I've talked about with other folks. That's how you identify a great leader. They build their team and those individuals fly out of the nest and go and do great things.
Absolutely.
That's how you, in my mind, the mark of a good leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to 18-year-old you?
Oh gosh. I think I would give the advice of, and this is a lesson learned for me, knowing the difference between being a team player and becoming the doer on your team. I don't know if you've ever been in situations where you're always the one volunteering and you become the doer, but you're afraid if you don't say yes to stuff that they're going to think you're not a team player. And so for me, I think I learned along the way that I had to set boundaries around, and I've talked with other young women about this. Always be a team player. You're part of a team.
Sure.
But pick and choose the things so that you don't become always the doer and stuff's always getting put in your lap.
And you can get overwhelmed.
You can.
Right. Yeah. There was a time period in my career where I felt, I had a young child at home, and then I was also, we were building a company. And so I felt the need to do everything. So there was probably a 3-year time period where I was room mom, PTA. I was volunteering for all these different committees. I was on the board of directors of an association in our industry. I was attending every trade show. I was everywhere all the time, and I got burned out so quickly. Wow. And then I took a full year off of all you couldn't ask me to sell brownies at an event. No way. I was not volunteering for anything because it's a burnout, it's a burnout process. And so I think that you're right. It's important to balance that, to be the doer, to be the team player. but also understand that, your own self-care has to come into that.
Sure. And I think as working women that we put ourselves last, right? Always.
All the time.
Always.
Yeah,
So yeah.
All the time. So what do you wish more people knew?
I think I wish more young women knew that they're not alone. I talked about this a few minutes ago, but I think know that there are people out there that have been through this.
Yeah.
And so seek out women to talk to if you're struggling or you're in a place of loss of confidence or loss of aspiration. You're not alone.
Yeah.
People have been through it before. And that's where advice really can be meaningful, I think.
Absolutely.
So.
What has been the most surprising part of the Women's Collective to you?
Gosh, I would say the response from women in Atlanta.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, when, of course, we launched February 27th of 2020.
Wow. Great timing.
Right. Great timing. And then, the next week was International Women's Day. And our mutual friend, Lynn Smith, had me on headline news. I went on my first national news broadcast. And then 7 days later, the world shut down.
Wow.
And I just remember I spent 6 or 8 months. I had to learn about 501c6s. I had to learn about how to put all of that together.
Yes.
And then I had to go figure out who I was going to invite and what kind of programs. So there was so much effort, 6 or 8 months of, hard work to get ready to launch. We had such a successful launch, and then we hit the pandemic. And so I spent a lot of the pandemic working on building my behind the scenes. I had been blowing and going and hadn't really had a chance to step back. So in a way, the pandemic was a blessing because it allowed me a chance to step back a little bit and allowed us to grow. So now, like I said, we're 130 members, but I've been very pleasantly surprised with the women that we've been able to include and who have joined in and who are passionate around the mission that we have.
Yeah. And I call the pandemic as bad as it was in many, many ways. I also say that it was a blessing of time. Sure. Because, I did the same thing. For me, my business had shut down for several months because we do large events. And obviously when that's banned by law, you're not doing a lot of it. And so, but it allowed me to step back and do some coaching. And so I learned that I had a passion for helping other entrepreneurs succeed. And it was really a blessing in my life. And had I not taken a breather, I probably wouldn't have known that for decades, because I go 100 miles an hour all the time. Sure. And we don't slow down very often, do we?
No, I think I always tell people I was going about 90 miles an hour before the pandemic.
Sure.
Now I'm going about 120.
Yeah.
I feel like I just can't, I can't keep up. It's a good problem to have, right?
It's a great
We're blessed
problem to have.
and it's a good problem to have. But
yes,
there are days where I wonder how I'm going to get it all done.
Yes, I understand. Well, delegation is what I've learned.
This is true. This is true.
Well, congratulations on all the success of the Women's Collective. I think that's amazing. And I hope that you guys continue to grow. Is your membership outside of Georgia as well?
Right now, we're just focused on Atlanta. Okay. We hope at some point to take it to a national platform, but I really want to get it right in Atlanta first. And that's sort of what I learned with my experience with the Atlanta Commercial Board and building out that mentorship program. We need time to sort of figure out a flow of events and like I said, we're doing 3 kind of larger events each year. And then we're doing some offshoots, some what we call leadership and SIPs programs. Mm-hmm. We'll do a summer series where that'll have maybe 10 to 15 women. Okay. And those will be more intimate settings where we can do some more networking. And because again, it's about connecting the women. Yeah. It's about them building their own network. And then it's about sort of growing outside of the network and how do we influence the change. So at some point, hopefully we'll be outside of Atlanta.
Oh, I have no doubt you definitely will. So congratulations on all the success.
Well, thank you.
And I really appreciate all of your time and being here today.
It was great to meet you. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Thank you for joining our guests on the Pretty Powerful podcast. And we hope you've gained new insight and learned from exceptional women. Remember to subscribe or check out this and all episodes on prettypowerfulpodcast.com. Visit us next time, and until then, step into your own power.